I can't think of Jeff Minter without the word legend in my head. He's been around the industry, influenced a great number of people.
I always found Jeff and his games fascinating because
I can't think of Jeff Minter without the word legend in my head. He's been around the industry for many years and still makes artful games that have influenced a great number of people.
I always found Jeff and his games fascinating because, Jeff was so distinct and it's just so unlike anyone else. And he's one of the true originals, one of the true iconoclasts in gaming. There's no one else like him. If Jeff didn't exist, you'd have to invent him, right? Because someone has to be that guy.
There aren't enough people like Jeff. He is in his things. What he makes is him. What makes Jeff stand out, and what for me was the whole point of the artistry when I was younger, was this notion that it's you in the thing. It is an extension of you. It is a part of you. It is part of your character, your personality.
What he's making is stuff he makes out of love, and that's always been present in everything that he does. I think that's just one of the things that makes the games lovely, that makes the games are so integral to Jeff, and Jeff is so integral to the games.
Obviously, I was a big fan of Jeff from the 80s. I think he was one of the main reasons I got a Commodore 64 after having a Spectrum. After seeing, I think, Sheep in Space and Revenge of the Mutant Camels. I thought, oh hello, this is interesting.
It was this lifestyle, cultural choice that he'd made, which was so different to everyone else. Everyone else was just a company or a product, and Jeff was Jeff. He was in magazines talking about his life. He was talking about what interests him, what was different about the way he approached it. He was engaging with people directly, and Jeff was passionate about the art of making games, being himself, and if people like to pay him money to do that, fantastic.
The way he dressed, he looked a bit rock starish and hippie-ish as well.
He had long hair and a beard, and he dressed a bit like a hippie, I suppose, which I could relate to, because in the 70s I grew my hair long. Well, we weren't called, well, we were known as hairies then.
He always had those Peruvian jumpers and the animals in there, oh yeah. And the long hair and oh yeah, here he is. Here's the hippie. He had like an Afghan coat, well, sheepskin on the outside and the fluff down the front. Yeah. Oh yeah, I remember that.
Very different from the other programmers that we met at those times. Very, very different.
It's somewhere between being very rock star and not rock star at all. I can't quite decide because he will just dress how he likes and speak his mind, and he's very lovely and very open to speaking with everyone. And it is very interesting to see someone who's never really fallen into the trap of wanting to conform to what the industry thinks anyone should be.
Jeff's always just made peace, I think, with living in the sideline. He's never given up on game design as a discipline, as a vocation. It's all very much work, but it is this kind of peaceful kind of compromise between this is going to be the work, but I'm only going to agree to do this amount of work for something that I really love.
A bit Tempesty when we're going into a tube. I do like the tube shooters.
I've been lucky that so far in my career I've always managed to work on stuff that I want to do, and I guess I just stubbornly want to carry on doing that really. I don't want to sort of compromise that in order to potentially make more money or whatever. I'd say I'm definitely off mainstream. I have kind of a tangential connection to traditional game dev scene, I think. I want to enjoy what I do. I want to feel happy with the things that I've made, and I want to make things that I want to play with. When I was in school, I dabbled in lots of various things. I got a skateboard, and I was a skater for a while, really enjoyed that. I wasn't even aware of the link between computers and video games, really. And it's only because I walked into this room one day in college, and there's one guy sat down the end with this weird thing which looked like a telly on top of a typewriter keyboard. Appeared to be playing some kind of crude game on it, and when I was a bit curious, went over and asked him where did that game come from. And he said he types it in. That was the moment that completely changed my life. I really enjoyed the act of programming. I thought that I'd finally found something that I actually had some kind of genuine aptitude for. But out of the whole sixth form college, we only had one machine, which was a Commodore PET. And officially, you had to book up half-hour slots. You could have 1 half-hour slot a day, and that wasn't really enough time for me to get stuff done. I mean, the thing is, back then, the Commodore PET was quite expensive. And I didn't come from a rich family. There's no way that our family could have afforded a computer, and there's no way I individually could afford a computer. I only had pocket money at the time, didn't have a job. And then this item came on the news and showed Clive Sinclair demonstrating the prototype of the ZX80 in some school somewhere. And the idea of actually having your own computer at home was unbelievable. I really, really, really wanted that ZX80. And so eventually got the money together and ordered it. It actually arrived on the same day as my A-level results. And I remember just forgetting all about my A-level results and tearing open the box from Sinclair and spending the rest of the day sat in front of my ZX80, having a wonderful time. The availability of these machines cheap is what really kick-started the software industry, because when other people started having these machines, they wanted software for them. And in fact, that's how I got started, really. I went up to a ZX Micro Fair. I had some tapes with some of my simple games I'd done on them. And I got talking to this one guy on the stand for a company called DKtronics. And I showed them some stuff, and they said, well, perhaps we could sell it. And I said, that's fantastic. And so I ended up doing some ZX81 programs for them. Nothing caught hold of me the way that programming did. I mean, it was just such a powerful thing. I just wanted to do it all the time. I was actually working quite a heavy schedule, and at the time I was going to Oxford Polytechnic. I was commuting to Oxford from Tadley, which involved like a 7-mile bike ride to the train station, get on the train, another couple of miles and up a very steep hill to get to the Polytechnic. All day at Polytechnic, back home, and then I was coming back and I was spending my evening hours working on this stuff for DKtronics. And then one day at Polytechnic, so I just suddenly felt really, really weak and really sick. And I had like tunnel vision. Then it was obvious that some shit was not right. And they found out I had some condition called pericarditis, which is where it's an inflammation of the lining of the heart, and the heart rubs against it and becomes distressed. And that took me 6 or 7 months to recover from that. It made me very weak for quite a long period of time. I had to have a lot of rest, and one of the things I could do while incapacitated that way, I could still do my programming. I mean, while I was ill, that's when I did some of the work which led to my first Llamasoft games. Llamasoft was formed originally as a partnership between me and these other guys. I've been hanging out with this son of a guy who owned the local video store in Tadley, and him and his dad, they said, why don't we form a company together and sell some of your games? You've been ill, you know, you've got to look after yourself. We'll look after all the business stuff. And we started doing stuff together. When we first started out, I was doing what everybody else was doing, just copying arcade games. On the VIC-20, I did this game called Defender with an A on the end, because that's how everybody used to avoid copyright back then, so they thought. And then Atari started throwing their weight around and threatening people. We thought we'd better at least make it so it doesn't say Defender anymore. So we changed the name of the game to Andy's Attack. Andy's as in the mountain range. Instead of rescuing humans, you rescued little llamas. It was a pretty crappy version, a chunky character-based scroll, and the ship was the size of a bus and handled about as well. These other guys made a big deal of that. They wanted to have 70%. I naively thought, oh, well, maybe that's a good deal. I don't fucking know. And I mentioned this to my mum. My mum was like, absolutely no way was this going to happen. And she insisted on meeting up with the people, and it was like, it's going to be 50-50 or not at all. But it became apparent they weren't going to negotiate. They wanted to have 70%. So we ended up splitting, quite acrimoniously, I remember. And Llamasoft became basically our family business, with starting out with me and being my mum. My mum doing a lot of the admin sort of business side of things, and me just doing all the programming.
So yeah, they've got this guy building on what he's done before, trying new things. I don't think he'd be trying to figure out a formula or a grand design that evolves. It'll all be instinct. His gut will be telling him, I'm going to try this. And then there is that lovely, holy moment where it all joins together into one thing. And for Jeff, that was Gridrunner.
It was sort of like Centipede. It was based off Centipede. But I got to the point where I enjoyed putting my own spin on things. I was no longer content just to try and copy an arcade game. I wanted to do something else. I like the idea that shooting things creates obstructions which then alter the path of things to come. And that does happen in Gridrunner to an extent. I'd put lasers and stuff in and made it much more of a space theme, a garden theme. And in Gridrunner, every time the laser pulses, all the obstacles on the field advance one level of evolution, and they've got a maximum of 6 they can go through, and then they turn into a bomb and fall down. It was a nice game. I thought it was quite nice. It took me a week start to finish. And we had a contract to sell the game in the US. I think it was one of the first Commodore shows. And this American guy in a suit came and was looking at what everybody was doing there, and came over to us and said to me, "We like Andy's attack, and could you put that on a cartridge for us to sell in the US?" True to his word, he went back and I figured out how to put the game on a cartridge, and they started selling it. And it sold okay, but it got our foot in the door over there, and they wanted more games. So I made Gridrunner, and I sent out a copy to the guy in the US. And here's what I've just done. I was woken up from sleep by the phone ringing, and I got up, and it was like 3:30 in the morning, something like that. I'm going to go out and see what's what. The phone rings, and the guy goes, "That game's amazing, we've been playing it for like 8 hours, I can't believe how good it is." So you're probably going to make some decent money off this. I'm like, "Oh, okay. And I went back to bed and back to sleep, woke up in the morning and thought, was that just a dream I had last night about somebody ringing me up and saying I'm going to make some money? And thankfully I'd written down on the pad by the phone what had been said. So. And sure enough, they did a great job of selling that game. I think it got to number 1 on at least one of the US software charts at some point, and made us a fair bit of money. I think that was the point where my parents realised that something was really up. Maybe this is going to work out quite well. We've done so many of them, really. We did Gridrunner on the 8-bits, that was more or less just plain Gridrunner that we had on the VIC-20, except with different resolutions. Then I did Super Gridrunner on the ST and Amiga, that was controlled with a mouse, and you had like a detachable nose cone which you could place in one part of the screen, and then you could move to another side and they'd both be firing, and you could use the right mouse button to retrieve it at any time, a bit like the nose cone in R-Type. Then we had Gridrunner on the Pocket PC. Yeah, the thing there was you had to rescue sheep that were coming down the screen, and if you got killed, then the pieces of your wreckage would start to fall down, but if you managed to guide them onto the back of a sheep, then you get a sheepy save and come back to life. And that actually came from a bug. That came from a bug where if you died, then it would act as if you'd picked up the sheep when you hit it. And I thought, it started happening quite a bit. I thought, that's actually quite a nice mechanic, so that when you die, you can retrieve yourself. Gridrunner Evolution. There's a lot more stuff going on in there. It's a much more advanced game in some ways. I ripped off sounds from just about all my favourite 1980s arcade games because I wanted it to sound like a 1980s arcade room. You know that feeling when you walk in and there's just all these sounds going off all around you? That's what I want to sound like playing Gridrunner, because it's supposed to be an evocation of an arcade game that never existed. It's done in the style of a Namco coin-op, so it needs that same kind of atmosphere around it. I think the Gridrunner on the iPhone, it's simpler than some of the other versions, but it's very pure, it's very arcade-like, and it's lovely. I think the most recent version, by taking Gridrunner back to its roots and then just building a few simple enhancements, I think I've come up with a better game. Because your power-up stack, I mean, you start out and you just got to pew, pew, pew out the front, and that gets a bit faster as you shoot things, so you pew, pew, pew a bit faster. And you get various little tiles that power you up, and they may give you 4-way pew 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 or something like that for a little bit. But you get the stacking effect. So you can have 3 or 4 of these things come together, and then suddenly you're just this intense fire flower of like shots just bursting out and flooding the whole thing. You just feel like a god for a few seconds. And it's nice. That's something that makes you, it keeps you tied into the game. It makes you feel, it gives you a little rush of like, yes, a little touch of euphoria there to help you along your way. living in the countryside. I ended up buying this little house in Wales, in this beautiful little valley. I wanted to have a bit of space for beasties, really.
Nice spotty ears.
You know, I like to keep pet sheep. When you're getting stressed out in front of the machine and you're indoors all day, and it's so nice just to be able to like go out and take a stroll in the field. You can't really be stressed out around sheep.
Morning, Jerry.
Like Minter will like go off to, you know, feed the sheep in the morning and do a nice 10-minute long Twitter video of him just feeding crackers to his sheep.
I'm sure you've seen Jeff's legendary sheep time videos that he does. You know, just let's go out and mooch with the sheep in the morning. Well, we can stream it from anywhere on the farm because we've got a Wi-Fi network all across the fields. And you know, it's the perfect Geek 7, isn't it? It's like, you know, I'm surrounded by green fields, but I've got Wi-Fi. What more do you need?
Jeff's living this gentle, suburban, modest sort of lifestyle where like his greatest indulgence is like sheep or like llamas, having, you know, this handful of animal companions.
Well, I got the llamas in 2001. I got a pair of llamas then, but one of them died last year. We found out at the time he was probably one of the oldest llamas in Britain. He was like 25 years old, which is an extremely good age for a llama. The whole llama thing came about basically because my parents had one of these Time Life books about South America and it had a nice illustration of a llama in it. I like the look of the llama. It's like an interesting beastie. I used to reference it in some of my early work. When I was thinking of a name for the software company, I'd written a little program on the VIC-20 which effectively let me draw on a little square of characters. I could draw like a little high-res design. I drew this little llama in there. And I wrote underneath it Llamasoft with 3 exclamation marks after it. I thought, that's what I'm going to call my software company. It's going to be called Llamasoft.
Jeff is extremely unique in what he's done from day one. Jeff, from the very beginning, I think, knew what great gameplay was. And he throws a bunch of beasties in there and put his own trademark on it.
But I didn't really go into the games that much until Attack of the Mutant Camels. Again, it's based on somebody else's game. I'd been to Winchester. There was a little video game shop in there. I can't remember what my parents were doing down there, but while I was just hanging out in town while they were there, I went in the shop, thought I could play some of they had VCS games in there, and they had the Parker Brothers Empire Strikes Back game. And it's fairly crude, but they've got these big blocky walkers that walk along. And I played it. Didn't at that point think camels. The camels thing came when I saw a review of that game in computer video games, and they described these walkers as being like giant mechanical camels. And I thought, actually, you could do a game like that, but why not have them be giant mutant camels? It was a bit rough. The camels looked like 2 fat guys in a camel pantomime costume, and the scrolling was very chunk res. I hadn't really worked out at that point how to do the fine scrolling on the Commodore 64. That sort of set the direction. Things kind of went from there, really. That was what Llamasoft was going to be. We were going to be the people who did these games with these weird animals in.
Well, my favorite Jeff Minter game is Revenge of the Mutant Camels. So I remember the first time I loaded it up and I was like, what the hell is this? Am I controlling a camel? And the camel is shooting. I was expecting a ship or whatever, because back in those days, camel was not the protagonist of a game until Jeff came along. And I think that's really, really cool and makes him unique, and his game's unique as well. And it taught me that there is no limits when it comes to making games. You can do whatever you want. And Jeff showed me that.
I like living in the countryside. To me, playing a game is not just about getting to the end and beating the final boss. The actual playing of the game should be the reward in and of itself. I mean, the journey should be the valuable part, not the conclusion. You don't just want to get to the end of the game, so I've done that, I'll cross it off and put it aside. I want to go, you know, one of my games to be something that people will come back to and think, oh, I'm going to play that. May not get my high score, may not even get to the end. I want to play it just because I really, really enjoy the experience playing. It's like listening to a music album. You listen to it again and again. You don't just listen to it once, oh, I've heard the lyrics now, I'll put that aside and I'll never listen to it again. You listen to it because it makes you feel good, because it's uplifting, or because it speaks to you in some way. And that's what I want when I'm designing a game now. I want to make an experience which is just makes you smile, which gives you that buzz, which just makes you feel good.
He clearly loved games and came from a place of, you know, Atari and classic coin-ops, and when you think about game developers that learn their craft by like riffing on their favorite arcade games at the time, I think Jeff is very much of that school. Like a lot of the games that he was like, well, what happens if you did Asteroids or, you know, Missile Command or whatever, but like it was sheep and llamas and goats instead of those things, and that's how he made it his own.
One of the things that fascinates me about some of the early games, because they were very constrained by hardware limitations, you could often only have a very small set of rules, but the very best games, out of that small set of rules, you could get a lot of complex behaviours emerging. I mean, but essentially it's all a feedback loop though, isn't it? It's all about like you doing something and the game feeding something back to you. So basically what you're doing when you're creating a game is you're fine-tuning that feedback loop. You're defining what it is, you're defining what the stimulus and response is going to be, and you try and make that satisfying for the player. I mean, that can apply to any game, I think. That essentially, that is the core of what's happening. So what I'm doing when I'm trying to make a game, I'm trying to make you feel a particular way. I'm trying to make you feel that way by tuning this loop until it feels really good. There's a point where, for me, it clicks and it starts to feel nice. And when I feel that, then that's the direction I go in. Balancing and refining that feedback loop and making it feel good is the essence of game design, really. What story you stick on top of that is up to you. For me, game design isn't something that you like start out doing and you don't write down the whole design on a piece of paper and submit it to people as a pitch and then go off and hire programmers and make it. It's something that you make as you go along and is fine-tuned as you move in different directions. You feel the direction it needs to go in. But it's all about this feedback loop. That's the core of it. So the first things I do when I'm making a game is implement the player and give them, you know, a little bit of a world to move around in and implement what they're going to do, be that shooting or jumping or whatever, and play with that and fine-tune that and get the feel for that. And as you do that, then often other little things will suggest themselves and you kind of can build on it and add more stuff to it. It will just take iteration. You'll just play it and play it and play it and play it, and the bits which you don't like, you'll file off if you like, and the bits which you like, you can enhance. But for me, it's just playing it and playing it and playing it and playing it until I'm satisfied. And when I'm working on a game, I will be, you know, the last thing I do at night will be to play the game for an hour or so. Every single night I'll be playing it. Every single night I'll be you know, just going over myself, what I like, what I don't like, which direction I need to go in. It's just a lot of hard work like that, really. I was quite guilty in some of my early game designs of like having difficult skills which went like that, and it's not really the most effective way to entertain your users, really. There's level 3 and the liquor ships in Iridis Alpha. Yeah, and the liquor ships were perhaps in the wrong slot. I mean, putting them on level 3 was perhaps not the kindest thing to do. If I was redoing that game now, I would put them a bit further away.
I feel like we don't talk about that game enough. There was some very interesting stuff going on in that game. There's like a split screen thing that was happening, and it was very weird. And again, all of Jeff's games are weird, but they're weird in a way that they're almost kind of challenging you to like understand them. Like it's not clear what you're supposed to be doing, but the genius of them is like, if you just give it 5 minutes, give it 10 minutes, and it'll click, and you go, oh, now I get it.
I learned something about difficulty. Basically, I've always been learning about difficulty. It's very important to allow people some levels of grace to find their way in before you start turning the screws. And then even when you do turn the screws and you've made somebody stagger through a level and they've maybe got like 1 life left, it can be nice to have a level that plateaus a bit or even goes down a bit and gives them a chance to recover and get a few lives back. So the early levels of my games now tend to be a lot less door slammy than they used to be back in the day. Certainly no level 3 liquor ships. I remember lying in my bedroom in the dark and listening to Pink Floyd. And in my head, I would imagine like sort of abstract geometric shapes sort of doing stuff in time to the music. For a long time, these abstract visions were just in my head. As I went through school, that kind of went to the back of my mind. And at first, when I was programming games, it didn't really occur to me that I could use the computer to do that. One day I was out for a run and I just thought, why don't I try doing, using some of this tech that I've got for making games and make something that's not a game, and why not try and just do a single approximation of what this thing I'd had in mind, this machine to externalise the abstract stuff in your head, to go how you might go about making one of those. And so I came up with this like 1K program, which I called Psychedelia. You just have this dot, and you move the dot around. You press the button, and all these flowing patterns would come out. And you could put symmetry on them, so you could kind of direct this in time to the music. It was lovely. And it blew my mind just how cool this was to play with. And I got my mates around and I said, you've got to try this. And sat them down and put on the Floyd and gave them the joysticks and said, just do this. And people really enjoyed it. And it was so nice. It was so pure, it was something else. I felt like I'd broken through into some area where not many people had been working. In fact, people had been working there. It was actually only years later I found out that Atari made the Atari video music in 1977. When I did find other people doing it, I kind of felt validated, really. I felt there is something here that's worth looking at. There is something that's perhaps worth moving forward and looking at in a bit more detail. I felt it was something that was too pure and too good in itself. It was just too pure to be commercialised. I wanted to just give it away. And I did. I gave the original version. I gave away as a listing. I've got it published in magazines. It was a hex listing. You put this thing in. Eventually, we thought, OK, we will do a version for sale. An extended version, which we sold. It wasn't very expensive. We released it and the reviews were very much polarised. It was probably one of the most divisive things I've ever done, because you had like some people, well, obviously they'd been waiting for something like this to come along, and there was a few reviewers who were really just like got it straight away. There's this one guy who said, the review was something like, I find mere words too cumbersome to describe the brilliance of this concept, or something like that. I'm thinking, well, that's the best review I've ever had, and probably the best review I'm ever likely to get. And then for the same programme, somebody else saying, what absolute load of rubbish, what the hell does Minter think he's doing? So, but I knew I was onto something.
He's embracing the medium in such a radically different way from anybody else. And he's not even unsure, I don't think he's even sure about why or how he's doing it.
It's the sort of thing you could put your mum in front of the telly and you wouldn't have to explain it to her. You just put a joystick in her hand and say, waggle that. And instantly, it's like, I get it. I can see what I'm doing, I get it. But by waggling this stick, something's happening on the screen. And, I think that's part of the appeal, because it's certain it would draw people in that wouldn't necessarily normally be into computers at all. I was aware of his games, but I think it was one of the Atari shows that I actually first saw Jeff's light synths when he was demoing Colour Space at the time. Graphics was something I was really into, and this interactive real-time graphics on a computer, which was something you only ever imagined was something you're going to see on the TV, bringing that onto a home computer, that totally grabbed me. And when the 8-bit version of Colour Space came out, I was totally hooked. Ever since then, it's been all about the light synths for me.
It's really interesting because you look at his work, it starts with knockoffs of other games, but with things that he's adding himself. You can see that he's going, how can I even do this? And then over time, there's like a lot of experimentation.
I developed quite an interest in just trying to do stuff that was a bit different than the arcade style stuff that people do. I think, oh, we've got these machines, you can do anything with them if you want. Why not try out some new ways of doing things? And sometimes I went a bit too far. I just wanted to have this different idea where instead of having a main character with a gun always shooting something, you had your main character was effectively controlling a little droid and protecting the flock with this by just moving this little droid around. The controls were very weird. It's kind of go. It probably would have worked better with a mouse than with a digital joystick. But as it was a bit inaccessible, and that was reflected in its review scores from some places. And the guy who did the review for Zap magazine is a guy who previously had sent me a very nice letter saying how much he enjoyed, I think it was Anticipital, and that part of the reason he got the job at Zap was because he'd shown people his skills on Anticipital. And so I thought it was tremendously disloyal for this guy to immediately join up with them and then pan my bloody game.
I think the thing that Jeff didn't understand was I didn't like half of his games, but the half I did like, I loved. And it wasn't anything about him. For me, the opportunity on Zap was just a sort of conduit to play some more stuff and share opinions. So of course, one of the first games we review is a Jeff game. So I'm like, yes! Get to see a Jeff game before it's released or whatever, I can't remember what it was. I was really excited about that. I just didn't get on with it at all.
It was all just experimentation. It wasn't done out of bloody mindedness. One of the things I did like in Mum Along was the grid that you could move around to play the levels in different orders. It was just like, let's see what happens. Does this work? I think it works. Maybe, you know, people don't agree with me, but at least I tried. There's more than one magazine that didn't like it.
The failing was, because this is all sort of new ground doing all these reviews in this way, critiquing was not, at the time, was just more pretty much an opinion. It wasn't a proper critique of what did work, what didn't work, why it probably didn't work. Here's my ideas about why I don't think it worked. It was more a case of you'd write about what it was about and you'd give an opinion. That was it. So that was the structure, that was the framework within which you were working.
I was being a bit precious about my design when it came down to it. The criticism was fair play. It was not my most accessible thing. I still think it's quite a nice game, but I wasn't that good at game design yet. I wasn't good enough to make that game work well. Perhaps if I was doing it now, I could make that game work properly. But anyway, it's all water under the bridge now. I like going to the Play Expo because it's really nice. People just come up and we can hang out and play some games. Yeah, to me, it's a great privilege when I meet people who actually enjoy the stuff that much. I think it's quite something when you meet somebody and they still remember playing bloody Attack of the Mutant Camels or Gridrunner, and they'll tell you how much they enjoyed it. I mean, the fact that they still remember it after all these years is one thing, but they actually seek you out and tell you about it is entirely another.
One of the lovely things about meeting Jeff is that you could walk up to him and be kind of like, hi, I'm going to talk to you about your games and effectively your work for half an hour. And he's just kind of like, yeah, let's talk about the Jaguar, let's talk about this, here's a project I decided to make that never got finished.
I've always enjoyed that. One of the things I enjoyed in the old days was going with Llamasoft to the old 8-bit computer shows.
The Llamasoft stand was like, you know, it was like Mecca to all of us lot. It was just like, what's new, we've got to go and find Jeff's stand. And you'd see it from miles away. You know that's going to be Jeff's stand, because like there's this huge plushy sheep on top of the booth or something.
For us, it was never really about selling. It was about letting people come up, and I'd be out the front, we'd play games together, and they could chat to us. And it was just a tremendously exciting time, and also it was great fun. I mean, going up to the shows, meeting the people from the other software houses. It was like a big group of mates all having a wonderful time.
If there was a computer show on in the UK, Jeff and his mum and dad were going to be there. You know, when I was a young lad, I'd always like, go say hi. And there's so many people that I know today that I still remember from back in the day that were young kids that would turn up on the stand. You know, it's people from all walks of life. So you'd always see a few of the regulars that would be at every show, but, it'd be the excitable kids like myself that it was just like, this is fantastic, I love all this trippy graphic stuff. You'd get people who'd go along and their dad, probably had no interest in computers, and he'd go along and strike up a conversation with Jeff's dad. I remember that distinctly. With Dad, I'd be talking to Jeff's dad about something, that Dad's talked about at the time. It's like, oh, I don't get all this newfangled computer stuff, but, the boys do. Jeff's, he's a pretty quiet guy, as you know, but at a show, he would be completely engrossed in, flying one of the light synths or playing one of the games. And he'd get a little bit of a crowd show up just to watch him playing his own games.
I went to a couple of shows at Earl's Court or wherever back in the day, a PCW show or something, and I'd go past the Llamasoft stand, but Jeff wasn't there. So, I don't think back then when I was a teenager it would have ever have occurred to me to try and hang out with Jeff Minter. And then when I was in my late 20s, I was working for magazines, and I'd got to interview quite a few big names, so I became a bit more blasé about it. So I'm of the feeling you should, people say you never meet your heroes. I think you should always meet your heroes if you get the chance, because sometimes they turn out to be fantastic.
No one else is Jeff Minter, or could be Jeff Minter. That's just what he was, and that came with a whole bunch of bits and pieces to do with stuff they had put in his games. It looked a bit rock starish and hippie-ish as well, because it was part of what you were buying, I think. And that stuff was always communicated directly to his fans.
I like to do these newsletters. You see the newsletter called Nature of the Beast, and I'd sit down, just write a chatty little newsletter style thing, talking about what I was doing.
One of the first games of his I bought had his address, and he said, for a newsletter, write to. And I thought, yeah, go on then, let's see what this is about. Not thinking it would be anything, I thought it would just be advertising and stuff, And the first one arrived, I think it was number 1. I read it and I went, wow, wow, what? Is this guy for real? Yeah, and then they kept coming. I think I don't remember whether you had to send them stamped addressed envelope. Every time you got one, you sent one back. I think that was the deal, but yeah, he used to write them quite regularly. It was news about how he was developing the games and other things that happened. It just keep you informed. It's just great.
Everyone else was just a company or a product, and Jeff was Jeff. Programming for me started from the inspiration of being a fan of these people like Jeff that were sitting at home making their own games. You'd read about him doing this in the magazines at the time. He used to do these great interviews. They were so vivid, the way that he told the story of what he was up to, what inspired him. And I was thinking, yeah, I could do that. That was just totally different. It was his heart on the page and it was his heart in the game. And that inspired me.
What Jeff Minter has going for him is a style not only inspired by the 1980s, but a look that is inspired by psychedelic art.
The stuff I do, I mean, it's quite fair to call it neo-retro, because it takes a lot of the ethos and design philosophy from retro games. But also we can mess around with lots of trippy new stuff and go crazy with particles and all kinds of effects that we couldn't do back in the day. Back in the early days, when the hardware was quite limited, then the scope of your game design was really defined by what the hardware could do and also what you could do with the hardware.
When he's just designing graphics for himself, I think coder art is the kind way to put it.
His games were quite unusual compared to most of the others, in the sense that there's so many animals. Because he would have the animals doing things and chasing each other or whatever and blasting each other. I mean, it's not like soldiers or anything. It's animals creating a new world where, you know, animals are doing weird stuff.
I sent him some drawings I'd done of a kind of a half-man, half-goat thing, and it was just doodling. But I just read Brian Aldiss's Heliconia Spring, I think was the first one, and there was about these two races of this sort of humanoid and this sort of half goatee thing, which and they had I believe it was the son was called Batalix. So when I did these drawings anyway, and I put them all onto one sheet and I sent them to Jeff, and I gave him the title of Batalix because it seemed to fit. And I think he must have fallen off his chair when he saw them, because he got in touch with me and he said, "Have I got a brain leak or something?" He said, "This is going to be the title for my next game." And I hadn't told anybody. And I think that's what prompted him to ask me to do the screen. Having this sort of space background with ships and things blowing up. And there had to be some animals, you know. And he liked it so much, he put it in the game.
While this realist aspect is compelling for him as well, you can see the Salvador Dali there.
I was influenced, as I'm sure many of us were, Matthew Smith included, by things like Monty Python. Love Python, so love sticking that kind of abstract, weird humour in the game. It's just part of being British. My games are very British. Somebody said that to me in the talk I gave the other day, and it's true. I am as British as a cup of tea.
Yeah, in the last 20 years, he's obviously been kind of associated with this rave visuals aesthetic.
When that happened with Tempest 2000, when I discovered the visual feedback effect I had in there. And that informed not only stuff in Tempest 2000, but also the stuff that went into the VLM, because that used it extensively.
You play the game by Jeff Minter. You're definitely inside his mind. And I think, you know, maybe that's part of the success of Jeff as an artist. You know, you're not only you're playing one of his games, but you're inside his head as well.
As the 16-bit era advanced, we were having difficulty getting our games distributed. We'd always relied on getting into distributors to go to WH Smiths and that kind of thing. That was how we sold our games, and we sold some mail order, obviously, but most of them at retail. I loved Robotron, so I'd been working on the Llamasoft style Robotron game, and as I was getting fairly near to completion, I felt it was quite a decent game. And I rang around a few places seeing if they'd be interested in publishing it, and nobody was really interested in it. There wasn't really any market for my type of games. This fun scene that we'd started out in it wasn't like it was disappearing, but it was mutating into something else. It started getting more commercial, and then you had like arcade licenses became more prevalent than film licenses, and then you needed to have more marketing to get into the magazines, and then the distributors would only take you if you had so much of an ad spend every month. And it seemed to me that if you wanted to stay in that scene, then you had to become something other than what you'd been before. And I didn't want to become something other than what I was. And I think I was just being stubborn, basically. I didn't want to give it up. So I'd heard of this thing called shareware. In the early days, shareware was very pure. You actually gave the software away complete, and people paid you if they were getting the value out of it. And I just thought, why don't I try doing that? I got in touch with SD Format, and they said they'd put Llamatron on their cover disc. And so I wrote this famous text file which I put on the disc, where I basically explained the concept. Here is the full copy of Llamatron. If you like it, then pay us a £5, which was also considerably lower than the price of software, which was about 15–20 quid for a game in those days. And we'll give you a copy of Andy's Attack as well. We weren't the first people to do it by any stretch. It was being done quite a lot earlier in the US, and there were certainly other people doing it in the UK. But I think we were one of the first to be seen to be doing it. Llamatron was probably the real breakthrough game where I actually managed to get a degree of mass appeal.
That was a big stepping stone for me in terms of understanding what motivated Jeff and his kind of genius in video game development, really.
Even if you had seen Robotron, I don't think I would have put the two quite together, you know what I mean? Because Jeff had totally done something unique with it.
Robotron was a ruthless arcade game, and I wanted to make a game that was kind of Robotron-y but was more accessible. The main thing I did was to give the option for the player to have this little droid which followed you around and helped you. A little AI droid would go around and shoot things for you and collect beasties for you and actually really genuinely usefully help you out. And it made that game a lot more accessible to a lot more people without needing the absolute mad skills that you need to do Robotron itself.
Looking at an enemy and going, hang on a minute, am I being chased by an umbrella? And do I have to catch that to make it stop raining? That makes sense, but it wouldn't exist in any other game. But somehow, in the games that Jeff writes, that logic just kind of clicks into place and you go, aha, yes, get umbrella, that stops the rain is bad, the umbrella is sentient, that's fine, now I'm going to go after this telephone.
But if it was just like a load of things being thrown at you, there wouldn't be a lot of entertainment in that. And actually, I'd say Revenge is a little bit like that. Llamatron itself is great in that those things move in specific ways. They've got predictable ways of moving. They're not just things bobbing about. Like items in the game world that have their own like behaviours and characteristics as well.
It's just so fun and so ridiculous, yet somehow completely and utterly makes sense within its own world.
It's a nice blend of Jeff Minter and Robotron. So it's just this beautiful mix.
And people absolutely love that. People love the fact that we trusted them to take this game and they could basically test it for themselves. And they loved the game and they sent us money. And it was a time when we weren't making a lot of money, so it really did save our ass at that point. And it was quite moving because loads of people, as well as sending money, they sent letters telling us how much they appreciated it, how much they loved it. And at one point, there was a point when this was all kicking off. I was living in Cumkeek and I had a fax machine. And my fax machine every day would just go with rolls and rolls and rolls and rolls of faxes of my mum just faxing me these letters that were coming in, of people just expressing their joy at having been trusted to pay for this game only if they liked it. And even though people send me more money than I asked for because they thought I deserved it. It was lovely. It was from going through banging your head against the wall with recalcitrant distributors to this outpouring of love was extraordinary.
I think Jeff has a fascinating history with Atari.
There's no escaping the fact that Atari have been an incredibly important part of Jeff's career. I mean, obviously Jeff has had a huge soft spot for Tempest.
It's sort of about those glowing analog colour vectors that's just absolutely stunningly beautiful, especially when compared to the other artwork of the raster artwork of the day, which was crude and blocky and not very satisfying to look at. This thing just was a thing of beauty in and of itself, and it made a deep impression on me. Tempest was a game which never really made it over to the home systems of the day. You could have Donkey Kong and Space Invaders and all the rest, Pac-Man, all those made it out, but Tempest was something special that never actually made it through.
When he had the opportunity to work with Atari and they said, who wants to make the next Tempest game? I mean, I'm assuming he was just there at the meeting just going, me.
I was at a stage where I had a pretty friendly relationship with Atari in the UK and in the US really, and doing some stuff on the ST that got me into the Jaguar on the ground floor really. I went to a Jaguar DevCon and then got developers to come along and hear about it. They said, we've got various IP we'd like to put onto the Jaguar. We'll read out some names if you're interested, stick your hand up. And they said Tempest. I thought, Tempest? I stuck my hand up. At that point, I'd never done any 3D stuff either. I'd never done any vector stuff. I'd never done any polygon stuff. So I was actually a bit scared doing it. I thought, because I don't actually know how to do any of the things that you need to be able to do to make that game. But I was able to get enough together to be able to do this game reasonably well. I got the basic Tempest working on that and was just doing outlines. My producer was trying to edge me towards doing solid graphics, and for a while I didn't want to do that. I thought I'd rather have a higher frame rate and keep the wireframes. But he was quite correct. He pushed me towards doing the filled polygon stuff. I had to admit, when I put the filled polygon stuff in, it did look a lot better.
Yes! I think Tempest 2000, there's a lot of firsts in there for him that have stuck with him that are characteristics and signatures of his style. And technical stuff like feedback.
I discovered the visual feedback effect I had in Tempest 2000. Quite by accident, one Monday morning, just getting up sitting at my breakfast table and thinking, what would happen if I plugged the output of the blitter back into itself? And came up with this lovely sort of feedback. I then spent the next 2 days playing about with this game. Excellent. Whoa, this is amazing, this is really trippy.
He managed to make certain aspects of that game look organic rather than digital, and like dynamic rather than just like static. It wasn't a bunch of 2D sprites flipping through frames, it was like an algorithmic expression of math up on the screen. And those things are new to me. Those things are consistent to his work ever since. That's a key part of what he does, making math beautiful.
I was invited to the launch of the Jaguar in New York. Towards the end of the evening, I was hanging out with one of the main system architects of the Jaguar. And he started telling me how he thought Tempest wasn't very good. He said it really didn't show the potential of the Jaguar. He said Atari only really have it on their list as like a make-weight game. It's not going to amount to anything. It's a bit rubbish, you know. I thought, fucking hell, the designer of the Jaguar is slagging off my game and we don't like that. And then it came time to go out for final test. I can't remember which show they were coming home from, but they said Tempest 2000 won Best in Show at some big exhibition. I went, what? And I thought Atari really didn't think that much of it, and then suddenly it was like, wow, yeah, actually they seem to be really liking it. And yeah, so then it came out on the Jaguar and people didn't hate it.
Yes! 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 Yes!
Nobody can do Tempest better than Jeff.
Tempest 2000, that was the flagship game. That was the killer app. Like, if you had a Jaguar, you had to have Tempest 2000.
When I got that game, I literally just played it for weeks and weeks and weeks and fell in love with it. And having things like the helper drone as sort of like a slightly easier mode to ease you into the gameplay means that you can kind of explore what it is about this game without really needing a huge amount of instruction. It just basically is the perfect thing to create a game that is very addictive, very rewarding without being too tough but still incredibly challenging.
Super Zapper Recharge.
Jeff took the idea of Tempest and turned it into something that was so much better.
I think for many people, the Atari Jaguar was just a Tempest 2000 machine.
It just was kind of everything you needed for an addictive game in this really amazing sounding looking package. From the point I put this into the Jaguar, that was kind of me gone for a while.
Tempest is the perfect example. And Jeff's curiosity of like, oh, I wonder, what if? And now it's just become like, you know, one of the big stories of his career, one of the big stories of his life.
Jeff obviously is brilliant. Like, he's still doing that thing. He's still doing the games.
People remember Llamasoft and the long history, and people sometimes forget that there are two of us here, and these games aren't just Jeff Minter games anymore. It's Llamasoft, and Llamasoft is the pair of us. But it was getting to the point where you need more than one person to do this stuff, really.
When Giles first came along, it was at exactly the right time. So they'd met and they'd become friends online and got chatting, and obviously realised that there was a lot in common because Giles is, is a complete ninja coder.
One thing we have in common with Jeff, I would say, we have an idea in mind. We both like to see it becoming something tangible, something you can touch it or play with it or feel it. For Jeff, it was mostly software. For me, it's also about hardware.
Giles is almost as eccentric and unique as Jeff is, but in his own special way.
Jeff is the kind of person that can solve things in a way that probably most people would not, using unconventional methods maybe, but he gets things done. I'm much more into maybe a more formal approach about how to solve things.
He's this mad Italian coder who has his own particular strengths, and it seems that they fit together quite nicely.
I think our nerdery is well aligned, if you want to put it that way.
And I think without Giles, there would not be as many Jeff Minter games in the world as there are right now.
Now with Giles, Jeff is developing better technology, and that's given him the ability to stay independent. You can just concentrate on the game. He's probably got a deeper level of thought and understanding of game design than he's ever had. That's something I've got a lot of time for Jeff, in that every single game there's something that's a bit new now and pushes stuff forward.
I like doing light synthy stuff, and we decided that since the light synth was quite versatile and could come up with a lot of cool effects, then why not use this to build games in? I mean, actually have that capability as a starting point for making games. At that time, Space Giraffe was the closest integration I'd done of the light synth and the game. The game was literally sitting inside a visualizer effect for all the levels, and I had a very specific design objective to use the psychedelic visuals in the background as part of the difficulty of the game.
So basically, it started to become, if we were more correct to say, a framework. So we called it the Neon Engine.
What he did is, without getting too nerdy about the technical stuff, he came up with this concept of what you call a virtual machine. And the idea of a virtual machine is a layer of software. I mean, much like, I guess these days you've got things like Unreal Engine or Unity. So you've got a platform where you code to the platform, but then that underneath translates to the hardware it's on.
And it makes my life easier because I just code to the Neon Engine, and he makes sure that it works no matter where it gets deployed. So we had like a subset on the Vita, we've got it on the PS4, we've got it on the Xbox One, we've got it on the PC.
He's not created like an engine that just does one thing. He's created an editor that allows him to make very varied things, which is great. It's in Space Giraffe, it's in Gridrunner Revolutions, it's in every game since then as well. That's like the engine of what he makes today, like in a real literal sense as well.
I think this is a continuation of a journey that's been going on for 30, 40 years. There's hardly been a point when Jeff's made a computer game where he's not made a visualizer, and I don't ever want that to stop. And whatever feeds whatever, I don't care as long as Jeff gets to keep making the thing, because they just keep getting better. He's an artist that just gets more and more powerful, there shouldn't be like, oh yeah, you can retire now. There's a new thing, get on it. Yeah, like, job's not done.
The first Jeff Minter game I bought was a game called Abductor. The aliens would swirl in from the top and swoop down and you had to shoot them. And it reminded me of the arcade games I would play when we were on vacation with the family at the beach, you know, like Space Invaders and Galaga and stuff like that. That had that simple arcade experience that I liked. So I was familiar with Llamasoft and Jeff Minter's name. So when Gridrunner came out, I'm like, well, of course, I'm on board for that. And that was the one. That was the game. This game, there's something about it that was transformative. This person who made this game understood all the things I loved about arcade games. I played it to death. When I became a filmmaker, I wanted to make a film about video games because the first proper job I had was in video games. I was a video game graphic designer in the mid to late 80s. It would be my first career. I was super nostalgic for it. And the difference between the way it is now and the way it was then, I thought there was a story there. So I cast about for a story. A friend of mine who I used to work with in the games industry said, well, you should do a film about Jeff. Jeff's career spans the history of like the 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s. That's generations of like hardware technology and game development, and like the business has evolved so many times. Jeff could be the constant throughout that story. Each game shows you a snapshot of history at that time. And it's a unique opportunity to show the development of an artist and the development of the medium that he's working in, and encapsulating that in the story of a guy's struggle to get his art out into the world. That was a sketch that I went into production with. What happened through those interviews, something much more compelling to me emerged out of it. I was aware that Jeff had done a light synth. Light synth has been like Jeff's passion project since the early 80s. And then I didn't make the connection at first. So Jeff would have these parties at the farm every weekend at one point, and they were doing this thing with this light synthesizer. One of them would DJ, and they would party all night till the sun came up. And Jeff talked about it in the context of how they became really close friends during this, and it was a magical time that could never be repeated kind of thing. But what he was really telling me was about this project he and his friends developed and presented to Microsoft. A project that would change everything Jeff did for the rest of his career. What they were making was something Jeff would call neon. And neon is something that defines Jeff and the relationship Jeff has with his fans. You know, it meant something. I wanted to find out what that was. Lots of people understand that they feel connected to a musician or a singer. Lots of people feel connected to an actor or a writer. But it's rare to say that people feel connected to a video game designer. And I met a bunch of people who all said it and meant it in a way that was real, in a way that was completely unexpected to me. I think the story of Neon is a story about somebody who never gave up. And I think we all need that.
When I was 13 or maybe younger than that, I can remember lying in the dark, listening to music. And in my head, I would imagine like sort of abstract geometric shapes, sort of doing stuff in time to the music. I was like 14 years old, sitting there daydreaming in my English class. You know, people daydream about being a rock star and playing the guitar on the stage. I was daydreaming about doing something I didn't quite know what, but with big screens with stuff happening on them and lights going off. It's just there as part of my imagination. It's a kind of voluntary synesthesia, maybe you'd call it. And I always wanted one day to make a machine that would let me somehow perform these things that I have in my head and put them out on a screen for other people to see. After I'd been doing video games for a while, I just thought, why don't I try making this light instrument? And that became this 4-player interactive light synth. And that could have been the start of something extraordinary. The main problem was that I could never sell it, because nobody knows they want it, and they won't know they want it until they've actually tried it. So in the end, the only way I've been able to develop the techniques is by bringing it into video games.
Jeff's story ends up being kind of like a road trip through video game history, but the road keeps going. I mean, this guy's been around for so long. Aren't you curious to know why?